wondering, where were your parents born?
My parents were born right here in Manhattan.
And
My mother's address was on Broome Street, as a matter of fact. My father lived very close by, I'm sure.
that's where they met?
That's where they met, yeah.
Father?
My father was a physician. My mother was a college graduate and was supposed to be a school teacher, but my father decided that there was going to be one breadwinner in the family and she better decide who it was. And so that was the end of her teaching career.
And how did your father get to be a physician?
He wanted to study medicine from a very young age, and his father had died when he was very, very young, and his mother supported the family of 5 children by running a small grocery store. There was not enough money for him to pay his tuition, so he left college for a year, worked in a post office, and made enough money to finish medical school.
And was he living at home during that time?
Oh yes, those days all children lived at home. I was born in the Bronx a long time ago and lived there for a good many years until we moved.
Remember how old you were when you moved?
Just about maybe 5 or 6. And then we moved several times, and that was it.
So where did you end up?
I ended up being married.
When you were still living with them?
We lived in the Bronx at the time.
Always in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Do you remember if the Depression affected your family in any way?
I'm fortunate to say it did not. My mother was a financial whiz. She had great control over the finances in the family, and she amassed quite a fortune. I went to elementary school in the Bronx. I went to high school in the Bronx. And then I went to New York University. I got a Bachelor of Science degree. I studied commercial education, and from there I got my MBA, which was a master's in personnel management, and that was it.
So did you go to work after college, after your MBA?
Yes, I did. My mother, again using her brain, said, "You've born and raised an only child, and no one is going to be able to take advantage of you. You have to learn what this world is all about." And so she suggested that I spend 6 months of my time in one industry, learn about that, move another 6 months to another industry, and learn about that, which I did for several years. I loved publishing, and I loved people, and I loved personnel management, and those are the industries in which I stayed. And then my final job was with an accounting firm where I met my future husband. Well, he was the counsel, outside counsel for this firm. And at those days, the end of the tax season culminated March 15th. And the company for which I worked used to throw a big party for its employees. So, of course, I went to the party, and he, as outside counsel, was also invited to the party. At which time, he asked me to dance. And so the cute story of that was, while we were dancing, I referred to him as Mr. Salzberg. And he said to me, "Well, you can call me Henry." And quick as a flash, I answered, "But that would be mixing business with pleasure." At which point, he took me home that night, and that was the beginning.
Wow. So how long after that were you married?
Just about a year or 2,
Wow.
less than 2 years.
And where were you living at that time?
Manhattan,
With
my mother.
your mom.
Yeah.
Then where did you live when you first married your husband?
We lived in Manhattan, and we lived at a hotel for a while where I had my baby.
Uh-huh.
And his formula was raised on a 2-burner electric stove, and that didn't work. So we had to move out of there, and we moved back to the Bronx, believe it or not.
Oh.
Yeah.
So all 3 of you, did you move into a house or an apartment?
No, into an apartment.
In the
And we
Bronx.
lived there for several years until we moved down to Manhattan.
Oh.
Yeah.
And where were you in Manhattan then?
Sutton Place,
Oh, on
where I
Sutton.
lived for 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah, in the
Wow.
same
So
apartment.
you're a real New Yorker.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have any other children or grandchildren?
Yes, Susan was born. She was about 3 years old when we really moved to Manhattan, and I just had the 2 of them.
Uh-huh.
That was it.
And
Yeah.
and how many grandchildren do you have?
Just one granddaughter.
A granddaughter.
Yeah.
And how old is she now?
She was just 20. She
Wow.
just celebrated her birthday, and she's a junior at NYU.
Oh.
We're an NYU family.
What is your first recollection of becoming interested in art or starting to make art?
Well, I was always dabbling, I should say. And
With what kind of
with
medium?
just anything, just pencils and stuff. And then when I had my baby and all the mothers were pushing baby carriages or sitting in the park and gossiping, that wasn't for me. So I decided I was going to do something more creative, and I started to study art at the local Y.
Oh. Is this in the Bronx or in
In-
Manhattan?
No, this was in the Bronx.
Oh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then I was in a class, and the class was all doing the same painting. And the instructor came over to me and said, "You go sit in the corner and you do your own thing." And I said to myself, "Oh my God, he thinks I'm a hopeless case. He's shunting me off by myself." He probably recognized something in me, I don't know, because from then on I really concentrated on the study of art. And I studied at various schools, mostly with private instructors, and that went on for many years.
So then you were working on making paintings in your home, or did you only work when you were in class?
No, I worked at home, of course, and then in class. And I went to several art schools.
So what kind of a space did you set up for yourself in your home?
I had always had spare rooms wherever we lived, and the spare room was usually my studio.
I know that you've tried a lot of different mediums, so can you tell us a little bit about the different art mediums that you've worked in?
I think I've worked in practically everything. I've done woodcuts, linoleum cuts, I've done lithography. I've worked not in oils because I found them too messy and too difficult. Acrylics was much easier to work with. That was it.
Did you do any sculpture?
Oh yes, I forgot about the sculpture. I did ceramic sculpture and stone sculpture, which I loved. And I worked on the stone sculpture with pneumatic tools, where I developed a bad shoulder, so I had to give that up. So I stopped the sculpting, but I loved the sculpture.
So do you have a favorite art form?
No, I think I like them all.
You like them all?
yeah. Right now, I'm
working.
working primarily in collage and reverse painting on glass, which most people don't know what it is. They can't understand
Can you
how you
explain
can
it?
work in
Yeah.
reverse. But, well, you paint your picture on the front of the glass, and then you turn the glass over, and what was the back of the picture now becomes the front. And you're really quite surprised. You never know how it's going to turn out. Yeah, because you're really never through. You have to know when to stop. And that's the test of being a good artist, when one stops.
Right.
Yeah.
That you've been doing a little needlepoint too. So how did that start?
That started because of a friend of mine, a very good friend, who was a knitter. And when she came around knitting all day long with all these yarns, I sort of got interested, although I wasn't interested in knitting, but I kind of liked the idea of needlepoint. And not the very fine needlepoint, but the heavy needlepoint,
Right.
because I think it had more character and more dimension. So that's what I did.
So do a sketch first.
Absolutely. The basis of any good art is a good drawing. It's my philosophy. You cannot get good art unless you have a good basic drawing. And so I do a drawing of the needlepoint, transfer it
Canvas.
to the canvas, and then use my ingenuity for color and so forth.
with
It's
yarn.
painting with yarn, exactly. And that's exactly what collage is too. It's painting with scraps of paper.
I know you've done some book illustration too.
Yes, I've done some children's books. I've been fortunate in meeting some people who write children's books and who liked my work, and I've done some children's books. I've done a book for you,
Yeah.
which I loved.
Yeah, about
that was the
Native Community Organic Farm.
right, yeah. And then I did a book of illustrations of line drawings of a lawyer friend of mine who wrote poetry. And more than poetry, I would consider it doggerel, because it was very clever. I did line drawings of every one of his poems.
Wow. I know you've worked with Adrienne Falzone. Can you tell us about her books?
She has a book now which is ready to be published, And the other books that I've done for her is What is an Angel and Selfish Sally. And her books all have a moral. And they're full of color, and they're kind of interesting. She usually sends me a manuscript, and I read the manuscript, and I decide what illustrations I want to use. And she sometimes suggests the illustrations that we should use. We collaborate, and a book comes out of it.
You also mentioned that you were working on a book for a school system.
Yes, connected with the Florida Atlantic University, there's a program of education in the elementary schools, which is supposedly directed to these young children to prevent bullying and that sort of thing. And the man in charge of this, or responsible for it, decided on a book entitled The Bears of Harmony Forest, to show how the bear family live in harmony with others. And so he asked me to illustrate that book, but the program is in its infancy stages, and it's going to be all through the Lodge District in Florida.
So right now you're doing mostly
Collage, acrylic painting, and reverse paintings on glass. I switch from one to the other because you sort of get bored doing the same thing. Yes.
I was visiting you here last August when you showed me a photograph of a collage that you had in an exhibit at Florida Atlantic University, and I said, oh, that collage would make a good mosaic. So I took a picture of the picture and I brought that home and turned it into a mosaic. And then your son, Bob, texted me a picture of another collage that I made, and then we decided we would do a series. And between September and November, you started to make some sketches, some other sketches, and then I came to visit you again in November, and I showed you the mosaics, and I took pictures of the sketches, and then you went off to Florida, made the collages, which I collected in December, and then I began making the mosaics. My parents are both New Yorkers. My father was born in the Bronx on Clinton Ave, and he was one of 7 children raised there. And my mom was born and brought up in Washington Heights. Actually, my father became friends with Helen's husband when they were 13 years old, so they were longtime friends. And they, New Yorkers, we lived in southern Connecticut and we always were in New York a lot. My dad was captain in the Army during World War II, and he was stationed somewhere in New Jersey, and he went into a Red Cross tent or building or something. He saw my mother's picture on the wall, and he decided that he was going to marry her. And then he found out who she was, and he kept knocking on her door until she agreed to marry him. My dad was a garment manufacturer in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He had a company called Mitchell Brothers, and they made ladies' pajamas and nightgowns and bathrobes. And they had a factory in Bridgeport, a factory in Ellery, South Carolina, and a showroom in New York City. And I got to work there a couple of summers when I was teenager and in college. And I got to play with a lot of different fabrics and buttons and trims and all different things like that. My mom was a homemaker and a housewife. And before she had children, she had 4 children in 6 years, right after the war. So we're all baby boomers. Before she had children, she was a milliner. So she made fancy hats for women. And she enjoyed doing that. She always enjoyed making things. She used to make clothes, and she did a lot of needlework and needlepoint, and she was always sewing something and making something.
So she was very creative.
Yeah.
And you probably picked that up from her.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I was born in Bridgeport Hospital, and I was born less than a year after my older brother. So the joke that we always heard was that the doctor was mad at my mother because she got pregnant so soon after having my brother. We had a neighborhood school where we lived in Trumbull, Connecticut, called Edison School. It was right around the corner from our house, and in fact, my husband lived in that neighborhood too when we were little, and we used to be able to go to school and walk home for lunch and walk back and forth to school every day, and it was very nice and very nice, close-knit community. I went to Trumbull High School, and I went to middle school in Trumbull too. And then I remember in high school taking whatever art courses I could. It was very limited, and I remember always liking putting things together, doing sculpture-y kind of things. And in high school, I was always involved in the decorations committee for all the dances we had back then in the 60s. We had a lot of dances all the time, and we always decorated. We turned the gymnasium into ballroom, and we made really big sculptural decorations and wall decorations. And I remember spending hours after school working on decorations. I went to Simmons for a year, and then when I got there, I realized it wasn't the right place for me. So I spent a lot of time across the street at Massachusetts College for Art, and I kept literally bugging them until they let me come in. So they let me attend as I had to be a freshman again, and that was fine. And so I went to Mass Art, graduated from Mass Art with a degree in crafts, with a concentration in weaving.
So when and where did you meet your husband, David?
I knew him my whole life. Our mothers were pregnant together, and we were neighbors, so I knew him since before I was born. And then when we were about 5, his family moved from Trumbull to Fairfield, which is a town nearby, and he and I used to see each other in the summers at camp, and sometimes in high school if his football team played our football team, we would wave hello. And then we were in separate colleges, and one day I stayed overnight in Harvard Square with a friend of mine who had also gone to Simmons, and he was walking into Harvard Square with a friend. He had been staying with his cousin, and we spotted each other across Mass Ave in Harvard Square. And that's how it started. And we ended up chatting and chatting and chatting, and we went to Bailey's for Brownie Sunday, and then we got married.
What year was that?
We got married in '73, and we met each other again after not having seen each other for a while in February of 1970, and one of the things we found out is that we had both attended Woodstock the summer before in '69, but we didn't see each other there. We lived for a year in Easton, Connecticut, and then David applied to and got into Brandeis Graduate School and for theater, and we moved to Waltham, Massachusetts, and then we lived there for a while. Our first child was born there, and then we moved to Wellesley, Lower Falls, where 2 more children were born, and then we moved to Natick, where our 4th child was born.
Yes, and I met you when you were in Wellesley.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Yes, so we've known each other a long
time.
And how many grandchildren do you
Now
have?
I'm lucky to have 3 grandchildren.
You have 3 beautiful grandchildren.
Yeah, 2 girls and a boy.
I can attest to that.
I got married pretty much right out of college, and I worked in a couple of different places, and then we started having kids. And when we were having kids, I did some art projects with my kids, but I was not focused on any particular art at that time. And then 99, 2000, that season, I was on a trip in Europe for about a month with my family, and we saw a lot of mosaics and a lot of stained glass. And when I got home, I said, oh my God, I have to learn stained glass. I have to try to do some mosaics. So I did make a little mosaic with my youngest daughter, and then I was trying to figure out how to learn about stained glass, and I eventually was able to take a class in September of '01. I started taking stained glass. So I was interested in mosaics and stained glass. For many years I focused on stained glass, and now I'm much more focused on mosaics. This is a mosaic I made, And I made this in the early days when I was learning about mosaics. This is actually a stained glass mosaic because most of this is made of pieces of stained glass that are cut. And I started this at Snow Farm, which is a craft camp for adults in Western Mass. And I took a lot of mosaics classes at Snow Farm and started to learn more about it. Well, I did broken tile mosaics.
Yeah.
And cut glass because I was already into stained glass, so I had a lot of glass.
Do you have a studio where you create things?
I'm really lucky that I have a studio downstairs in my house, and it's a room that was many different things, but the last thing it was before it became a studio was a playroom for our teenage kids. And I think it was March of '03, I realized there were no kids using it, and so I decided to take it over. So I have supplies for stained glass and mosaics and fusing, and I teach there too. I teach mosaics.
And your latest interest is fusing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough last August, so just about a year ago, that a friend of mine who had a fusing kiln was moving and she needed to divest a little bit. So I bought her small fusing kiln. It's called a 14-inch round kiln, and some of her fusing glass. And it just happened to coincide with a conversation with Helen about turning one of her collages into a mosaic. And I decided to experiment on that first one, making some of my own tiles out of fused glass. Well, it allows me to be more painterly, more designy. I can drop colors in different places that I couldn't before, and I don't have to rely on what I can find. I can create what I want in the colors I want. It gives me more freedom, and also the fused glass tiles that I'm creating are so beautiful because they're glass and they reflect light in an amazing way that they have depth and they have color, and they just make the whole mosaic look more three-dimensional and more interesting.
Yes, I can attest to that.
Yes.
When you put the glass in the kiln, does it come out how you expect it would come out?
It sometimes does and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes the colors change. It often shrinks. It just doesn't work the way I thought it would work. However, since I'm making mosaics, I don't really care that much, and I can just use it somehow. It's rare that I have to throw away a piece because I don't like the way it came out. I just use it some other way.
Yeah, wonderful. I know you've done some displays around the town of Natick.
I was involved in making stained glass transoms for the children's room in the library, and while I was doing that, I was asked to make 2 stained glass windows for over the front door at the library. And then after that, I approached Artie Fair, who owns a building in downtown Natick and had these beautiful archways on the side of his building, and I asked him if I could put mosaics in there, and he said yes. So I got to build those mosaics with lots of help from different people and input from children in the community and help from the high school kids. And so there's 6 archways downtown Natick that have mosaics in them. And I worked on some restoration of stained glass that's at the senior center, and a couple of Ner Tamid's that are in different places, and the Center for the Arts logo in stained glass that's in the Center for the Arts. And yeah, I've been able to put my artwork out there for people to enjoy.
Yeah. So what's your latest commission work that you've done?
Well, I was fortunate to just finish a 30-inch round stained glass peace dove for the Peace Hall in Pugwash, Nova Scotia.
What are you doing right now, and where do you see yourself going?
I actually have hopes for the show itself to be able to travel as a show because of the story that it tells. Sketch, collage, mosaic, and the story of the 2 generations of women working together.
Wonderful. It's
Yeah.
great to hear.
Thank you. are in Helen's studio. Helen works right here on her dining room table. And what we have here is gloss medium and lots of papers and scissors and a brush.
Well, before I begin, I have to really study my drawing and decide what colors I'm going to use, what pattern I'm going to use, and how I'm going to start, whether I'm going to start with my foreground, my background. I have no idea until I sit and study it a while, and then the ideas will come. Then I will start. And I don't have to finish where I start. I can go from one space to another, and until I get the feeling of the look that I want.
Okay, that makes sense.
What I don't like, I just go over and change. I either rip the paper off, or I paint over it, or glue over it. And I really consider this mixed media because I consider collage with the paint.
Yes.
I don't do strictly all collage. And I'm just wondering, it's bewildering when I look at it first, and it's frightening. Where am I going to start? However, I'm looking at this and I see his big face there, and I think the most important thing here is his hat and his head. And I think I will work on that first, see where that goes, and then that will develop the background. So, shall we start?
Yeah, sure.
All
And
right.
what is this surface that you're working on?
This happens just to be a poster board.
Oh,
I
okay.
prefer working on canvas board, but sometimes I don't have it. And
Okay.
so I'll work even on paper, on watercolor paper,
Okay.
because the gloss adhere to anything.
So that gloss is your glue
It's-
and your
gloss.
varnish?
Exactly.
Okay.
It works miracles. Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
Now, I hoard magazines. I hoard all sorts of patterned and colored papers that I see, and if it is an interesting pattern, I will cut it out and file it away.
So where do you get these kind of papers?
I buy those in the art store. And then I look through them and I find a pattern that I think will be appropriate, and then I decide to cut and to paste.
Okay, and it looks to me like you're ripping also.
I also rip. Ripping makes it more interesting. Cutting makes very fine edges. And I like the freedom that one gets.
and the variety with
Exactly.
the ripping.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, so now, where do I begin with him? Let's say we begin with the hat. I will put one plane here, one here, one here, depending upon how the pattern fits in. What colors am I going to use? I have no idea. So we'll start with any color, and if it doesn't work, we can always add over it. Now here it's a pretty green, and I thought maybe that might make a good hat color, or why don't we get a more softer color, perhaps. Okay, let's try this.
Okay. And we'll move these over
Yeah.
here.
So we're going to start this way, and I'm going to start cutting because there's a sharp edge here, and I want that sharp edge to be maintained.
Okay.
And then the hat goes up this way, so I'm not measuring, I'm just cutting.
You just
Now that's good, and then to balance it, maybe we put another piece of the same color on this side. Okay.
Okay.
And then we want a corresponding color to fit in there somewhere.
Oh,
so we'll
okay.
cut this off. And I place them first before I really decide
to glue them on.
yeah, to glue them on. Now this looks like it needs a little triangle in there. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle.
I
You've
can
got
see
to
that.
fit the pieces together.
Do you put the glue under and over, or just
Both.
over?
Both. Both, yeah. And let's start with this.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. So I take this brush, dip it a little bit in there.
Oh, and you put some
Put
right on the surface.
Right on there. And then, and then just go over it.
Sticks pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And if it goes over the line, it doesn't matter because you can fill in with anything else. Now, there I see an empty space, which shouldn't be, and that happened because it moved.
Is there a certain kind of scissors you like to use?
No, anything sharp. And that can
You're
go
just
right
gonna
over
stick
that.
in, and that finishes that corner of the hat.
I'm not sure that it's finished because I could change it 100 times before it's finished.
That part
All right,
filled
now
in.
we're pasting the paste down there.
I can-
And then let's try this one to fill in here.
Okay. Wow, and now I can
You
see where all
you
these
see where we're getting a hat?
where all these odd
Watch.
shapes come from that I'm trying to duplicate in the mosaics. And
I don't know how, well, I don't know how it works in mosaics, but it sure
Yeah,
works
well-
here. There are no rules to follow. The rules are you do light against dark, but this is true in every art form.
okay,
Or smooth against rough.
okay,
To me, this is more of a feeling rather than a
Okay.
text.
okay. Because as you go along,
I'm changing
you're
everything.
changing and feeling what feels right to you
Exactly.
with the colors and the shapes
Exactly.
and the texture.
And sometimes it doesn't work and do it all over.
So you don't take it apart. You just add things on top of it.
That or I can rip. Either one.
Oh,
When
oh.
you rip, you sometimes get very nice effects.
Oh,
There's such a thing as a happy mistake.
yes, yes.
Now, pretty soon you will see a hat. And now we're going to fill in something there. All right, let's
What color are you feeling?
let's try
with?
that color.
This
Just
one
because
right
it's
here.
crazy and it's odd. Looks like it's a big triangle in there. Let's see how this works.
I've noticed there's a lot of triangles in your
Yes,
collages, and I never knew where they came from, but now I can see where they come from.
You see a hat
Yeah,
there?
I sure do.
I'd like a bright red in there. There we go.
All right. Okay.
What I would like to do is get some blacks. Now you can get the blacks out of a magazine.
Okay, let's look in the magazine.
And what I also have to do is stand it up
I'll get
because
that.
you get a different look when you're working on an easel. But many times I outline everything in black and I use a black marker or a Sharpie to do it. Don't go away with that black. I need more
There you
black.
go. Here's more black.
The idea is really to save the little pieces that you're working on so that when you have to patch up, you have enough.
So do you have a whole stack of magazines in the
Oh,
closet?
yes. Now, I don't know if this is going to work, but we'll see.
Yeah. So what you were saying before was every once in a while you hold it up so you can
You
get
have to, yeah.
visual on it.
Right. You can work with it on an easel, but it's easier to do it flat.
Yeah, because you're banging with the
Right.
brush. When I'm working on a mosaic, it's very hard for me to lift it up because all the tiles will fall off. So
Yeah, all right, but now let's see.
I don't get a chance to do that.
All
Yeah.
right, all right, needs one more little corner in there. You see,
The hat goes under his
I
nose.
can't see it when it's flat. So
Yeah,
it
and
has
over
to-
here there's a little white spot too.
Oh, the
right
little
there.
white spot doesn't matter. I fill those in with paint or with magic markers.
Oh,
That doesn't
okay.
matter, this little piece in here.
So we
And
can
we'll see.
show what it looks like.
So at least we'll have a hat.
All right.
How does that
All
look?
right, look at that. So now we have a hat.
If you want it true to form, take a picture with a camera. It's more interesting to be creative and go way out and go crazy.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
what I like to do.
Yeah. So do you have any artists that have influenced your work?
Yes, my favorite artist, who is a collage artist, whose name is Romar Bearden. And I love the way he works. Way, way out. Crazy.
And where have you seen his work?
Well, this is an interesting story. I had very good friends. He was a lawyer, and he had a client who could not afford to pay his fee. So the client gave him instead a Romar Bearden painting.
Wow.
He brought it home to his wife and daughter, and it was too far out for them, and they hated it. And they hung it behind the door so nobody could see it.
Wow.
And when I came to visit one day, they said, "Helen, look at this." I said, "My God, I love it." They wanted to throw it and me out, both.
And so then you saw some more of his work?
Oh, yes, I love it. He's gone now. He's passed away, of course. But I at the time, I never bought anything, but I just loved it.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Where else did you get to see his work?
In the museums.
In New York?
Oh, sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, so there we are with the hat. Now,
All right.
now where do I go from here? Do I do a nose? I'd like a bright yellow to go down the side of that.
Yellow.
A bright yellow you'll find in one of the magazines, I'm sure.
Okay.
Here it is.
Oh, wow. Look at that one.
Now, let's see. We go.
So you don't care what kind of paper it is?
Oh, no. You can even use cloth.
Oh.
You can use anything. But let's see how this nose will go in here.
Oh, yeah.
We got a nose.
Oh, yes.
Now, the other side of the nose should be another color. Let's try this color right here.
Oh, the orange.
Now, I look at this and I try to get a similar shape.
To what you have in your
Yeah,
sketch.
now let's see. So it makes it easy.
And
Patch that up. We'll see how this looks. It might not work at all. I don't think it will, but we'll try it.
yeah. So you like to cut all different size pieces.
Oh, sure. Makes it more interesting.
Now I see I made a couple of noses with glass like that that were big swaths of color.
Yeah.
All right. So here we have some black.
I just want a little triangle in there.
If you were to use some paint on the collage, does that happen at the end?
At the collage?
If you wanted
yes,
to use some paint.
Yes, yes, yes. Doesn't the working of mosaics, isn't it similar to this?
Yes, very similar. I
Yeah.
try something, and if I don't like
Like,
it, I
yeah,
remove it, and then
yeah,
I try it in a
yeah.
different place,
Yeah.
and I do it, and then I undo it.
All right, now let's see.
Let's turn it around so we can see it.
Now, we have to decide on what color I want to use there, and I think it could be a neutral.
Like
I
this?
thought maybe that.
Right up here.
I thought so. Let's put that there, just for the time being, anyway.
Okay, to get a little color in his
Yeah.
face. And I noticed that a lot of your faces have a lot of different colors in them.
Yeah, well,
And
that's
you-
what makes it interesting.
And you don't stick to actual skin colors. You use
Oh, no.
many
Th-
different
right.
colors.
It's a matter of hit and miss, really.
Uh-huh. So while you're working, you're playing with it.
Exactly.
And it's just your artistic eye that's determining whether it
Exactly.
works or not.
It's really, largely, it's an emotional reaction.
To the colors and
yeah.
how they fit together.
Exactly.
I can totally relate to that.
Okay, I go through the magazines until I find it.
Uh-huh.
How about this gray? Why don't we
Yeah,
try this?
great.
You never know until you put it down. I
Yeah.
don't know if this is going to work, but we'll try it.
Okay.
Why not?
So I can see that your sketch is a guideline. It's not.
Oh, yeah. Most of the time, it never works out the way I start. I start with one idea and I wind up with something completely different. See, but this is a matter of all angles. I need a red circle right
Do
there.
you like that one?
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, that's his cheek. Wow, that worked. Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
You just cut and paste and
Uh-huh.
hit and miss, and if
Right,
you're
and-
lucky, you hit it right.
That does look like an eye.
Not really, but
It will. It will.
It will.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes what you see is also in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't have to be an eye.
Yes.
But people will look at a face and know that it's an eye. And maybe this yellow color. Where'd we get that yellow?
Yeah.
Because it has to balance, that's the point. I could work all day, all night. It doesn't matter. I have no idea.
And then sometimes you start one and finish it later,
Yeah.
depending.
I put it away in the closet and don't look at it again until sometime later. And when the next time you look at it, it's altogether different.
And then you feel differently about it and you do something
And
different.
you're really never finished. You can go on forever. Anyway, I'm beginning to see a face.
Okay.
Do you?
Yeah.
And then maybe with a magic marker, what I will do when I'm ready is make a little nostril, a little black there to make it look.
Okay.
Although I see a nose now.
Already. Yeah, you can see his cheek forming now too.
I have to stand it up. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
You see it?
I see it. Yeah. So, would you like to work a little more? You want to take a break?
No, let's stop because you can only work a certain amount of time until fatigue sets in, and then
Okay.
you have to give up. You
Okay.
walk away from it, come back, and you see an entirely different picture.
I feel that way all the time, that I have to take a break and let my brain process what I've done so far.
And then come back.
And then when I come back,
You see another picture.
I see it differently, or I finally have the solution to what I couldn't figure out while I was working.
I can see that. I can see it almost all done.
Yeah. So will you be doing the background with acrylic paint or with collage?
No, I'll do it with both.
Oh, with both.
With both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So your main tools here are your scissor.
Scissor, brush,
And your brush.
acrylic. Yeah. Yeah.
There it is. I am working in my studio today to make a mosaic of Helen's latest collage, which she calls the Birdman. I've already made some pieces that were in the kiln last night, and I made all the pieces for the hat, and I started laying out tile, and I have all these other pieces that I'm going to be putting in the kiln today. And the trick is, when I'm doing this, I have to try to remember where the pieces go that I made. This one goes here. And they always come out a little bit different than I think they're going to come out, different size and different angle. I'm going to try to lay them out on here. I know this green one goes in the middle. This morning I'm going to go to the kiln and open it and take some more pieces out that I fused. This is the third time I've fused things for this mosaic. So this is the bird to go on his shoulder. It's going to go right here. Adjust, because again, I'm just working on my sticky mesh so that I can get an idea of what I want. So I just opened the kiln again for the fourth time, and I'm going to take these pieces off and start to put them down. I'm mixing up thinset. I did most of the mixing outside because I don't want to breathe in the dust. I'm stirring it up. I just make a small amount at a time because I don't want to overdo it and have leftovers. I'm going to start with the bigger pieces that are up here and get them in place because they're pretty close to the edge. And I'm going to start by spreading the thinset on the back of the piece. And I like to put a good amount on there so I feel like it's really covered. I'm going to set it down over here on my Ouija board, right about at the same place that I had it, right there. And then I press it and rub it on a little bit so that it's tight and in place. And then I like to make sure it's pretty close to the edge there. And then whatever extra has poured out on the sides, I like to wipe that off and put it on, back in my bowl so I can reuse it. That's why I have an apron on, because I'm pretty much wiping my fingers off all the time while I'm working. And I even like to wipe the pieces off a little bit. It's just less cleanup for later. I've gotten a lot of other pieces down. I'm still cleaning it up. If I leave the thinset on there and it dries, I won't be able to put the next piece next to it. So I want to make sure that I clean it up. The inside, because that's where the grout's going to go, I just Don't want it to be too high in there because I want to make sure there's plenty of room for glue. You can see I have a little time here to adjust these pieces and move them around a little bit while the thin set is still wet. But then this piece that I put on before, I can't move at all. I'm going to cut this down, this tile. I'm hoping to finish gluing everything, and I'm going to start down here. I have a couple of fused glass pieces that I can glue on. I have my thin set mixed up, and I have the pieces laid out where I want them. And most of what I had laid out before is off the board now, because I'm pretty much know where I want everything to be. I'm using a painter's knife, a palette knife, to spread my thin set, because that's what seems to work best for me. So now I've got all those pieces on. I like to spread it. It's called buttering. I spread it on the back, and it's kind of like spreading cream cheese on a bagel. And it's always a little bit tricky to remember where you pick the piece up from and then where it has to go. Wipe it off. I like to keep the surface as clean as possible. Today I'm going to grout the mosaic. It's all finished. Everything is dry. And I've chosen black grout. So I'm just going to start to spread it all over the piece with my hand. As I said before, I left a little bit of Wheatie board on the edges to create a frame for the piece. This part is kind of funny because it covers up the whole mosaic and you can't see it anymore. And the grout does go right over onto the outside of the board. You have to work pretty quickly because the grout dries fast. I'm going to clean this off a little bit so that there's not extra grout on the surface, because I want the surface to be able to dry and haze. Okay, so this you can see is what's called hazing, where it looks a little bit dry on the surface of the tiles. And that means that it's okay to start cleaning it. So I'm gonna just use paper towel and start to expose the tiles. Just a first pass, because it never gets cleaned off all at once. And I always clean my tile dry, not with a wet sponge, with something dry like paper towel or a cloth, or a dry sponge can work. Because if you use a wet sponge, then you're introducing extra water into the grout, and that can create cracks. And I have to be careful about this edge here. Because this piece is pretty big, I can go over this part while the other part is hazing. I'm smoothing off the edges here, and I can't really get them totally smooth until it dries a little bit more. There it is, almost. I have to do it one more time. And check my edges. These edges are a little more complicated than a regular square edge. And Helen and I had been talking for years about mosaics. And so I said, I think I could make a mosaic out of that. And she said, sure. When I was working on her, I was struggling with the background. I didn't want to have a very complicated background the way Helen did in the mosaic.
It's
and
a landscape.
I kept trying, yeah. I kept trying different, just like a white background or a black background, or I just couldn't figure it out. And then it just came to me that I should just do her and just cut her out. And
I think that's brilliant.
Once I cut her out, I was so happy that she was cut out. And then I ended up cutting everybody out, but that's how it started.
So when you looked at these collages, you were able to have a vision of them in glass.
Yes.
Is this how it usually happens?
I quite often see something that feels like I could translate it into mosaics.
Is this piece the largest one, or?
Yeah, this one is the tallest, and I was surprised actually how big it got. It made it so much fun to work with, and also it's just an amazing shape. And I had fun starting on this one. I think I started to make some bigger fused glass tiles. These big earrings, these were the biggest ones I'd made up to this point, and there's a white layer with red and brown and orange noodles and stringers and confetti and frit. There's a frit, which is crushed glass. And I wasn't quite sure what would happen in the kiln with these bigger pieces. However, they came out great.
I think so too.
Yeah, I love the way they look, that they're so prominent as earrings. And down in this section, I used a lot of Millefiori on black. And Millefiori is made from rods. I have ones that have flowers in them, and I also have rods of glass that are just plain glass that I cut into little sections. And the thing that's came out so interesting to me with the confetti glass is because it's clear and it's sitting over a color, the pieces look very three-dimensional, and they even have shadows in them from the colored glass going down against the other glass. With each set of eyes on each project, they've come out different, and I've been experimenting with how to get them to look like eyes and how to get that little sparkle in the eye and how to outline the eyes so that it looks right in the piece. And her lips came out nice and big. I love her lips. This is Joyvinda, and she's very happy. When I was working on her, I was making these black elements of fused glass, and I wasn't sure where I was going to put them, but then I ended up putting them in next to her face, and to me they look a little bit like braids hanging down under her headdress. This piece is called Rasha Keen, which is a name I picked from looking up medieval page boys, because when I finished this, that's what this looked like to me, even though it's quite obvious in the first sketch that this was supposed to be a woman. And even in the collage, it still looks like a woman, sort of, but it's already, something's going on there. And when I finished my mosaic, it looked like I couldn't really tell if it was male or female. This area right here on the chest is a piece of stained glass, which very closely resembles that paper with the mottled oranges and yellows. I enjoyed making all this funky hair. I had a lot of fun with this nose because I really almost shaped it and painted it like a real nose. This one is a clown. I really liked the sketch, and I loved the colors. And then it came to me that I would make the clown from the sketch and use the sketch as the thing that I enlarged to make my pattern, and use the colors and the patterns from the collage. I did a couple of new things that I hadn't done before, which is I cut my board out into a shape, whereas all the other boards are cut flat across. And I decided that I wanted the clown's collar to have this jaggedy shape, and the shape of his face is the shape more of the sketch. And I had a lot of fun making him. And again, I made some really big pieces. And on some of the other collages, I could create and make 15 or 20 pieces on my 12-inch kiln shelf at a time.
Yeah.
And when I made these big pieces, I could only make 4 or 5 fit onto my kiln shelf. So I wasn't quite sure, again, if it was going to work, but I love the big pieces, and I love the way they fit together. That it shrinks a little when I fire it. It fires up to 1425 degrees. So all these pieces fit together perfectly before I fused them, and then after I fused them, they ended up spread apart. And that gave me the opportunity to come up with a creative solution. And the solution was to put tile with little glass beads at the bottom to make it look sort of like jingles.
I love the hat.
Oh, thank you.
The
Yeah.
flowers are just, I can smell them from here.
The flowers were fun. And again, I used the confetti glass here over blue.
I love the ocular movement around the eyes. They bring definition, but they also bring depth to the eyes themselves.
This again is a function of the tiles that allow me to make that lovely curve under the eye and to emphasize the eye.
And this is probably the first piece where the space that you take up with the fused glass itself is much larger than
Much
in
larger.
the previous one. So
Yeah.
the confidence is building up.
Yes, yes. Yeah. He looks happy, which makes me happy.
Well, congratulations. What
Thank
a
you.
great collaboration, and the results speak for themselves.
Thank you. How are you feeling about this project?
I think it is absolutely fantastic. I think it's something that has never been done before. I'm sure not. And I just love the way it's developed, from the original drawing to the collage to the mosaic. I think the mosaics are awesome.
Thank you.
I love them. And it's been a labor of love.
Yes, for both of us.
I think
yes,
so,
it certainly
yeah.
has. And I was very happy that you were able to come to our opening reception in Natick at the Center for Arts.
Oh, I wouldn't have missed that for anything.
And
Need I tell you how it felt? I was in another world, and I was in another world for long after that. It was just wonderful.
it was very exciting, and everybody who I talked to who met you there was very excited to meet you. Okay, so thank you.
It's been a pleasure.